Hey, this is Brandon McManus, Denver Broncos Super Bowl champion, and you listen to The Scoop on alscoop.com.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to The Scoop. This is Season 6, Episode 18 of alscoop.com's podcast. I'm John DeCarlo. Sam Newman and Sam Cohn are with me again. No Kyle Gauss this week. We'll look forward to having him back next week. But
no Kyle giving you crap for saying his name last.
Yeah, he's drawn that out for as long as he has. But you never underestimate Kyle. He's always got something up his sleeve. So
either that or he's so upset that his name was going to be last. He's like, no, I'm just not going to make the podcast today. I'm going to sit this
maybe,
one out.
Yeah, maybe it's maybe he's taking a stand.
It's a grudge he's holding.
It's a grudge absence. It's a spite absence.
For personal reasons.
Maybe he'll start a spite podcast.
Starts a rival podcast
with Jim Boeheim.
Oh God, yeah. You guys watch Curb at all?
Yes, I love Curb.
I've seen a little bit of it.
And Larry started the Spite. What was it? The Spite Bakery, Spite Deli, the coffee place.
Yeah, the Spite Coffee Shop.
Yeah. Maybe Kyle's on his way to starting a Spite podcast, which would frighten me, to be honest with you. But no, probably not. He'll be back with us next week, we hope. We recorded this week on a Thursday. Thought it might be better to talk to you guys after a Temple basketball game, and here we are. Sam Cohn was on site down at the Liacouras Center for us today to cover Temple's 62-55 win over UCF for Temple's first conference win that puts them at 2-3 on the season. We will talk some football a little bit later, and of course get to your mailbag questions. But let's get to this basketball game first. Again, just an important, simple first step for Temple to get its first conference win. Damian Dunn led the team with 20 points. We saw some more good stuff out of Jeremiah Williams. Some good stuff late in the game from Jake Forrester, who had struggled earlier in the game. 10 second half points from Rod Carey. Sam, you were down there. What did you see in this one?
I think my biggest takeaway from this game was, and I think the quickest thing to point to is the difference between the first half and the second half. The first half, both teams looked a bit sluggish, kind of at both ends of the floor. And John, you might have been the one to mention this in our text chat that both teams look like teams that really haven't had much experience.
So Temple and UCF entering this game played the two fewest games of any team in the American Athletic Conference. Entering this game, Temple had played just 4 and UCF had played 6. So both teams are looking like teams that hadn't had the practice time that maybe other opponents in the American, other conference opponents have had. And UCF came in this game on a 2-game skid. They lost their last 2 to USF and I believe it was Cincinnati, maybe Houston. But anyway, they lost their last 2. Temple obviously has lost their first 3 conference games. So to start this game, both teams looked a little bit sluggish in terms of like not really having things figured out. And that gets me to my point about my biggest takeaway from this game was that stretch in the second half, particularly kind of coming out of the break. And then you have the Rod Carey breakaway dunk and things kind of just fall into place for them in terms of they get on this roll where things just start to click. And that's been a huge conversation or a huge narrative piece almost about this team hasn't yet figured it out. They haven't had the practice time. They've dealt with team pauses. They have a lot of new pieces. They're not going to it's going to take time to figure that stuff out. I think today we saw just a glimpse of like what that looks like for them when they can figure it out. And I asked Aaron McKie after the game, like, what do you feel? Where do you feel like you're at chemistry wise now compared to where you were at the beginning of the season? And he said, obviously, like they're not where they want to be. They still have things they need to, tweak, and they still have things they need to improve on. But if you ask me, and I think I speak for all of us that like this was a good glimpse at kind of what they can be, and this was a glimpse in terms of like how well they can play when things are clicking. Just knowing where guys are on the floor, having like good help team defense, figuring things out. That I think that was my biggest takeaway today. Was just like the chemistry was visibly better than it has been.
Yeah, I mean, just go off your point there. I mean, I think the ball movement was just fantastic that they were getting there. Obviously, I mean, they weren't perfect. I think you would like to see Brendan Berry have more than 6 points in a game and shoot better. But I feel like that'll come with time. Jeremiah Williams and Damian Dunn are still getting their feet wet as scorers. JP Mormon and Rod Carey, obviously, secondary options at this point. But in terms of being scorers, one of them is a facilitator. Drake can, turn it on when he needs to. But yeah, like you said, I feel like there's just glimpses of encouraging signs, and I think obviously that you're kind of just getting the mold of what this team wants to be, but they're not fully there yet.
Yeah, this might be a small thing to pick at, but not to pick up, but to point out, Brendan Barry, obviously, I mean, we can see what happens when teams adjust to him. I mean, like, he played 30 minutes. He's literally one of the top shooters in the country right now. So again, he only gets you 6 points today, but he took 4 shots, all from 3-point range. But he gets you 3 assists. He turned it over twice, but it might seem like a small thing, but he's not forcing the issue. He's not even trying to force the issue where he tries to like lean into contact or anything like that. He's kind of smartly looking around and say, okay, teams are closing out on me a little bit more or denying me the ball, so I'm not going to force it. And I might make that extra pass to a Jeremiah Williams, a Damian Don. Again, I think we talked about this. We'd love to see what this team's going to look like when they get Caliph Battle, and in the future, and it might be the distant future next season if that's when Jaleel White and Sage Tolbert finally play for them. But even if Brendan Barry only got you 6 points today, it was a smart 6 points. He didn't force the issue, but again, he helps you out with spacing, with the way he's able to shoot the ball. And again, I just think the fans on our message board might say otherwise if you ever check out one of the early game threads, but I just, like you guys, I quite simply see a team that's just starting to put the pieces together. And Aaron McKie has said that. I mean, sometimes you just have to take a very realistic, very practical view of things. They're a 2-3 team, but in my humble opinion, the roster is so much better than it was last year. You can see what's taking shape, with the exception of maybe, Brendan Barry, Ty Strickland, and obviously in the future, a kid like Hasir Miller, who's not a 6'5", 6'6" type of guard. They have length and athleticism all over the place. Again, I'd love to see what Sage Tolbert can do for them in the future. I'd love to see what any sort of grad transfer big could potentially do for them next year. But I think the pieces are there. Sam, you pointed out the ball movement was better. I think it's been better. There have been times where they have really moved the ball well, and there's been a purpose to what they're doing. And sometimes it just looks like there's a lid on the basket. You even saw the one sequence from Quincy Adamakoya where he had that one bad miss. He stuck with it on the possession, drained that 3. I think guys are just trying to settle into their roles and finding them. What we're not seeing this year is as much of the type of thing where a guy like Quentin Rose is holding the ball. They are moving it around. They have multiple guys who can score. Dre Perry wasn't a factor in the first half. He gets 10 in the second half. I think there are a lot of good signs. Again, they're a 2-3 team. I don't want to, oversell what they are, but I think you can kind of see the vision that Aaron wanted. It's starting to take shape. It's nowhere near there yet, but I don't know. They beat a pretty good team today. I mean, this was a UCF team that beat Florida State earlier in the year. They did beat Cincinnati. They lost to Houston, but they've got some pieces, and they started to catch up in the second half. But they held their leading scorer in check. So I'd have to say I like what I saw today. I think also too. I think I asked JP obviously you want to win this game in tighter fashion down the stretch. You don't want to almost blow that 10-point lead, but there might be something to be said for, squeaking out a game like this where you miss a few front ends of ones and then you hold on to hit some foul shots down the stretch. And JP said, we never really felt like the game was out of reach there. And that could, as cliche as it sounds, like build some character for a team like this where you have so many new pieces and parts.
Yeah, John, I want to get to, we'll circle back kind of to what happened kind of at the end of the game and what that kind of means for this team and the opportunity they were given. But just to go back to your point about the offense, I think it's interesting to think about, obviously no 2 offensive possessions are the same, but when you talk about like how much more, I don't want to use the word fun, but just like more how much more freely this offense plays as opposed to last year's roster. You mentioned not having guys swallow up the ball. You don't have as much isolation ball. You have a lot of really great ball movement. The 2 faults they find themselves in are either over passing the ball too much, find themselves running out the shot clock or having to chuck something up at the last second that's maybe not the shot they want. And they also find themselves settling for not great shots sometimes. They'll make a couple passes and then the ball there will be one more pass they could make, or there will be guys will be in a mid-range spot in a position where they could take a shot with 20 seconds left, 24 seconds left on the shot clock, and they take the shot that maybe is not the best shot, but they're settling for something quick. And the offense does move quickly. That is something Aaron McKie wants, but you have faults on either side. When they find that happy medium of making the right passes, making the right decisions, having movement off the ball, this offense flows really, really well. And that's when they find success. And I think we saw a decent amount of that today. And that's when they're going to pull out wins in conference play.
All right, so Sam, you mentioned the better ball movement. That's something that JP Mormon was asked about, and you can hear in this clip here. He just talks about them having fun. That's part of the fun part of the game is sharing the ball and getting the win at the end of the day. And I think we can all agree that JP also looks like somebody who's just a lot more comfortable in whatever they're doing offensively now when it comes to facilitating. Again, his 13 rebounds were big today. He made some big plays for him. But here's JP Mormon talking about, again, them just having fun sharing the basketball.
Yeah, man, we just started having fun out there and getting stops. That's how you have fun in basketball. You start to get stops, start to get out in transition, and then the ball finds energy when you start to move it and share it. So I think that was the main thing today. We share the ball, and that's the fun part of basketball. And then once you're having fun on the offensive end, it carries right over to the defensive end.
All right, so again, there's JP Mormon, had 13 rebounds today. We'll talk about what happened at the end of the game there. UCF went on, a 7-0 run to start making things interesting after they had gone almost 7 minutes without scoring. Things get hectic there. It's 58-53 at one point, then it's 58-55. JP actually missed the front end of a 1-on-1. Jake Forrester missed the front end of a 1-on-1 earlier than that. Obviously, we're having a completely different dialogue today if things did completely come unravel. But again, JP Mormon had said that they never really felt like the game was in doubt there. We'll see if this does build a little character for them. Sam, again, you were down there. What did you see in terms of them staying composed down the stretch there?
Well, I think as a whole, it's not easy to stay composed and keep the energy in when there's no fans. I think through most of the first half, as I was mentioning, things were a bit almost sluggish and they were making a lot of mistakes. That's when the game the gym just felt eerie. There wasn't much energy. There wasn't much life in the gym. As you get to the second half, when Temple starts to play better, when the game becomes more competitive, they're still trading buckets, but there's a little bit more of an intensity to the game later in that second half. And then you get down the stretch, and when UCF cuts that deficit, they bring it within 3. You start to think, okay, we might be in shape for, what could be an interesting ending. I'd almost tweeted out, but I backtracked because we weren't going to be in that situation, that Aaron McKie has been known for, made it clear that when he's in positions where it's coming down to the last shot or coming down to kind of the final possessions, he's not going to be the coach that's going to call a timeout, draw things up, slow things down, because he doesn't want the other team to have a chance to get set, and he trusts what his guys do in practice. It didn't get that far. It didn't get down to that scenario because Jeremiah Williams and Damian Dunn were both able to knock down free throws, but a couple huge defensive stops from Temple. There was one play where JP Mormon had the ball, grabbed a rebound. It was or a steal maybe. It was falling back and then fell out of bounds. And it was the kind of thing where if he stays in bounds, that's, that wraps things up quicker. But he falls out. It's UCF ball with maybe 24.4 on the clock, I think it was. And then it's just really great help defense from Temple is pretty much what closed out the game. JP Mormon comes up with a big rebound. They slow the ball. They don't push the pace at all. They get the ball into the hands of someone that can knock down free throws. Just having that cohesive play, understanding where guys are on the floor again, and having that help defense made all the difference in the world.
Sam, I want to talk to you a little bit more, and I probably sound like I'm starting the Jeremiah Williams fan club, but I'm going to talk more about him. How much credit do you give today to him for what the final results were with Brandon Mahan, again, UCF's leading scorer? Now, again, Isaiah Adams gets 17, Darren Green Jr. gets 17. Both those guys hit some big shots, particularly in the second half, to keep them involved. But Brandon Mahan goes 1 of 9 from the floor, 0 of 3 from three-point range. Did have 7 assists, so he affected the game in that way. But I want to make a couple more points about Jeremiah. But again, he's been solid on the defensive end. How much credit do you give him to what happened there today?
I would say about 50-50 because Damian Dunn guarded him out of the gate. Mm-hmm. I couldn't tell you exactly how much of the game Jeremiah was on him. I know Damian Dunn was on him for a decent portion of the game. JP Mormon had mentioned in media availability the other day that Damian Dunn's defense has been a little bit overlooked lately. That Jeremiah's really been the guy that everyone looks to because he's been the one against Kendrick Davis and against Houston's guard, whose name I'm blanking on. Doesn't matter. But he's been the guy. Jeremiah Williams has been the guy to step up, 6'5" guard. He's been the one to take on the opposing team's best player.
And I didn't mean to shortchange Damian for what he did on him too. Again, he spent
No, that's okay. So Jeremiah's generally been the one to step up. Today, Damian, for a good portion of the game, was the one to really shut him down. Jeremiah does have the length and does have the size advantage on Damian, but Damian did a nice job shutting him down. Temple did opt for a little bit of 2-3 defense at one point. But for the most part, like those two guards have really, Jeremiah and Damian, for a freshman and a redshirt freshman, have been impressive on defense against some of the best scorers in the American. I mean, Temple 4 games into its season, 3 games into, I guess now 4 games into his conference schedule, has played 2 of the top scorers in the conference. They're dealing with some really, really strong scorers, and they're making these guys' lives difficult. And that's one thing that Aaron McKie said. We just want to wreak havoc. We want to create chaos. We want to make these guys' lives difficult defensively. So having those 2 guys in your backcourt has been really helpful at the defensive end for them.
Well, what did we say coming into this season? We said that, Temple, are they going to win the conference? Probably not, but they're going to be a tough matchup defensively. And I think that's what we've seen so far. And even if they're playing small ball, I know that more has to do with the matchups that they're going with. It still seems like it's pretty working with them, even with JP at the 5. And I know we talked about how that might be a little bit concerning, and against bigger teams, it's going to be. He grabbed he tied a career high with 13 rebounds today. I think you kind of like what you see from the small ball, but I also think McKie has indicated they're not getting what they need out of their bigs. I mean, Jake, I don't remember how many minutes Jake played today, but he wasn't effective. And then you saw guys like Nick Jordan and Arashma Parks not even check in. So, at the end of the day, I feel like, their identity is going to come through defense, and everything is going to work its way out from there. But the fact that they're able to, pretty much just deny one of the better scorers in the conference today, it was pretty impressive to me.
Yeah, Jake Forrester played 27 minutes, did start again, went 2 of 6 from the floor, grabbed 5 rebounds, kind of teetered there in foul trouble with 4 personal fouls, had 2 turnovers. Again, it got going a little bit. He hit that one bank shot, that one important shot off the glass in the second half that helped them out. But overall, UCF shoots just 32.8% from the field, 31% in the first half, 34%, nearly 35% in the second half, 7 of 19 from 3. But again, Aaron McKie, I think at one point in the presser said, we could be better on every end of the floor. I do chalk some of this up to, both teams being rusty. Again, neither one of them, as Sam has said, they've played between Temple and UCF, the 2 teams that have played the fewest games this season. But the numbers are what they are, and there's a good defensive effort there. And getting back to Jeremiah Williams, another game where he plays 30-plus minutes, played 30 minutes, another double-figure scoring game for him, 12 points on 3 of 5 shooting, 1 of 2 from 3, 5 of 7 from the line, grabs 3 boards, 4 assists to just 1 turnover, and 3 steals. So affecting the game again. For me, I didn't ask Aaron this. I felt like it kind of would have sounded like a little bit of a cliche question, because there are multiple guys, obviously, that are handling the ball in this offense, or really any college offense now. But to me, this is the first time that Aaron's really getting his hands on a point guard from day one. Now, obviously, even when he was an assistant with Fran Dunphy, he was involved in Nate Pierre-Louis' recruitment, and Nate didn't end up being a true point. But it's kind of fun hearing Aaron talk about a guard from the get-go. And he's got a little bit of Chaney in him, where he's not as boisterous as John Chaney was. But even after good games, sometimes after really good games, that's when Chaney would be at his finest. He'd rip his team a new one, and just to keep them humble. But again, not to say that Temple won by 25 today and they were a completely flawless basketball team. They were far from it, but they got their first conference win. And Aaron was kind of like, a lot of the answers was like, could be better. Jeremiah could be doing this more, could be doing this for, but I think secretly, or maybe not so much secretly, I think Aaron's got to be really pleased with what he is seeing from him. Again, I mean, those are good numbers. And I think we've talked about this before. Chris Clark has been with us at least once on the podcast last week, where he's not the best shooter on the team, but I don't see a broken shot with Jeremiah Williams. It looks like he shoots the ball pretty cleanly, hit a 3 today. And again, just more good basketball out of him.
And just to go back what you were talking about, post game, Aaron McKie was asked, it kind of seems like, Jeremiah's kind of arrived, the game's not too big for him, that sort of stuff. And Aaron was like, yeah, I thought he was okay, that sort of stuff. But then he went out of his way to say that he thought he was tremendous defensively. So I don't know if you guys have noticed this, but anytime somebody asks him about Jeremiah, his eyes kind of just like light up a little bit. You can tell that they're excited about his potential.
Well, it has a chain effect in a couple of different ways. It's meant fewer minutes for Ty Strickland, and Ty Strickland's going to have to fight for minutes even more now. And of course, Ty, we want to mention, of course, and remind people that he is coming off of shoulder surgery. So that's part of it. But, again, it might, if Jeremiah Williams keeps this up, I'm sure Hasir Miller wants to come in and play right away next year, because he is a really tough kid and a competitor. But I think they're getting as much, if not more, than they bargained for out of Jeremiah. Again, we keep saying this small sample size, but again, as Aaron mentioned, they've played some of the better teams in the conference right out of the gate, and they've faced some of the better scorers right out of the gate. And to me, he keeps passing the eye test and keeps getting better. And they're just, again, fans probably don't care. It's about wins and losses. They're just so much more of a fun team to cover this year. The roster, again, there's just more to look at down the line with this roster, I would say.
I think with Jeremiah, the moment has never looked too big for him. Maybe that Houston game a little bit, but it looked big for, everybody. I mean, Damian Dunn included, but, after they kind of went through that, it seems he settled down. And I mean, the way, I think Sam has mentioned this before, but the way that he's been playing, you would never be able to tell that he's a true freshman.
If you look at Jeremiah's body of work, 5 games in the season, he has one you would call, like, based on kind of our expectation, I would say, I don't want to say that great. I don't want to say good. I don't want to say average, whatever. He has exceeded our expectations, I think, 4 out of those 5 games in terms of what we might have thought he would be for this team, or what anybody might have thought he would be for this team before the season started. He had the second SMU game. He missed a majority of the second half due to cramps in his legs. And he didn't exactly play his best basketball. He probably hasn't played his best basketball yet, but he has been really solid and impacted the game in a lot of different ways so far this season. And today he kind of bounced back from that second SMU game. I mean, John, you mentioned he played 30 minutes, 12 points, kind of a quiet 12 points. He wasn't exactly the one scoring a ton. He wasn't exactly the one but he wasn't exactly taking all those shots. He only took 5 on the day. It was 3 for 5 from the field. But as JP Mormon, I think, said the other day, like he's done a really good job of controlling the offense, telling guys where to be, like just being that pure point guard and having a good understanding of reading the floor. He makes a lot of the right passes. If you look at Temple's possessions where you kind of look at it and say, that was a really good possession. They moved the ball really well. They got a great shot off that. A lot of it can be credited to a pass or kind of like a hockey assist that Jeremiah Williams makes. He's been a really huge piece of having a free-flowing offense and being able to control things and having guys move without the ball on the floor. So I think I don't think you can totally undersell. Again, he's not perfect. We're not putting his name up in the rafters in Temple basketball lore, but through 5 games in what is a small sample size, he has been without a doubt impressive. And that goes for both ends of the floor. We've talked about his footwork on that Euro step. We've talked about him getting in passing lanes. We've talked about him guarding some of the better guards in the American. Like he's made a lot of really good plays.
Yeah, I mean, as of now, I think I mentioned this in a tweet a couple of weeks ago. They look smart for recruiting him. I mean, this is a kid that they did not get to see day in and day out, and we know what recruiting was like in the pandemic. They got him to commit without getting him on campus, and he had really like mid-major interest at best, with a couple of high majors kind of sniffing around. And again, he's been pretty good. I think one of the other points they made today, I think he say something along the lines of like, I want him to have more of a voice on the defensive end where it comes time to talking about where guys should be at the defensive end of the floor. So I think any coach likes being in that position where they have a freshman guard and they're like, I like what I see. I like what I see. And now I can kind of grind down on these finer points here. So again, I think a lot of positive things to take from this game today. Again, Temple will now play at Tulane on Saturday and not ECU. ECU can't play due to COVID issues there. So now Temple pivots and now they're on a flight down to Tulane this Saturday. We kind of heard that was coming up, and then JP Mormon kind of broke that news in the post-game press conference. He said, I'm bummed out that we're not playing ECU. Of course, he's from North Carolina, so they will play at Tulane instead. One of the other things that Aaron talked about, I asked him what it's like down the stretch now in a game like this, because there were obviously, just like any game, there were momentum swings in this one. Temple had a couple of 10-point leads. They bounced back in the second half, and then they almost sort of almost, gave the game away in the second half. What's it like when you have moments like that, where there are momentum swings, where, you maybe have, I don't think I put it to him like this in the question, but hey, you think back to the play in transition where Jeremiah gets the steal, gets it out, outlets it out to, didn't outlet it out, but got the ball out to Dre Perry for his dunk. Normally, and again, we know that not every game at the Liacouras Center is sold out, but that would have gotten the crowd on its feet, and it's just always dead because you're not playing in front of fans. Sam, you've been there on site. I haven't been there on site yet. You've talked about how weird and eerie it is. So I asked Aaron, what's it like when there are different momentum swings in the game, good, bad, or indifferent? And he talked about this anecdote, which I thought was interesting. So we'll play this clip for you here.
I've never played a live game. Well, my one experience that I had, not to go off path, my one experience that I had is my rookie year. I played in Japan. I was with the Portland Trailblazers, and we played two of our opening games in Japan. And it was 30,000 people in the stands. And I mean, they were so quiet you could hear a pin drop. And it was different. It was just kind of like, it wasn't like a normal basketball game to me, but being an athlete and playing, you generate your own energy. You create your own crowd and everything else in your head. And we practice a lot with a lot of silence. Like at the end of most of our practices, everybody's dead quiet, no balls are bouncing, and we shoot free throws. So I grew up playing in the playground where there wasn't, people out there watching and cheering. So get used to it. The game is the game. You still got to go out there and play. But the one benefit of it for me is I can yell out there and just kind of talk to those guys while they're out there. Whereas if we had fans in the stands, they pretty much wouldn't be able to hear.
Yeah, so I thought that was cool. Like him just talking about, playing, when he was a younger player at Temple and them going to play in front of like 30,000 plus fans in Japan, and they were just not saying much. But Sam, for you, I mean, obviously you're not playing the game. What is it like if you had to explain to fans and people who are listening to this podcast, what's it like covering games right now where there are no fans there and you can't anticipate what crowd noise is going to do?
It's really strange, and pumped in crowd noises. I was kind of pro pumping crowd noise before covering a basketball game in person.
Sam's official stance on crowd noise.
Just because I thought it was the kind of thing where like it makes somewhat of a difference. It's not a huge deal. It gives it's not the kind of place where you can just hear a ping drop. Like there is something. It's better something than nothing. But going to a game live, it felt really weird to hear fake crowd noise. Like on TV, I think it's phenomenal. But being there in person, fake crowd noise is weird. And I'm not a fan. But it all comes down to the energy you're generating off the bench and on the floor. And the difference between what they're doing now and what they were playing in a similar situation last year, this is more like, I don't want to call it a practice, but it's basically a practice. Not playing in front of anybody. You're just, it's like a scrimmage. That's really what it is. And Aaron McKie has said multiple times since before the season that it's like, this is how you grow up playing the game. When he's like, I grew up playing on the playground, there was nobody watching. Like the intensity of the game comes from within rather than from the exterior. So you kind of have to build your own energy on the floor. You can't just feed off the energy of the crowd. When when Jeremiah gets that steal, runs up the floor and bounce past it to Dre for like a vicious dunk, the bench net went nuts. You have every guy on the bench up on their feet cheering. And that's the kind of energy you need both from the bench and also like that needs to come on the floor. You need like when guys are making plays, that energy rises. And that's what I was talking about before, how in the first half it felt almost dead and sluggish. And the second half, like you start to take the air out of the building. Even when there's no one there, you can still get that similar feeling, but it's so much harder to generate that kind of energy. So down the stretch when they have to deal with because when worse comes to worse, if you're not playing well and there's a crowd, you can still kind of try to feed off of any energy that's there. But if there's no crowd, you're doing it yourself. So I think they were able to, on certain plays, like kind of figure things out and kind of build that energy together as a team. And I think that comes down to not having as much experience together. Like when these are your guys that you've played with for years, it's different than these are guys you've been playing with for a couple of weeks or for a couple of months, like having that energy and having that chemistry. So I think having that today was good for them that they sort of started to feel like they had chemistry together, and then they dealt with down the stretch playing as a team and figuring things out and closing out a game together.
We'll talk a little bit more basketball with you when we get into the mailbag in a few minutes, but do have some football stuff to pass along. So again, the transfer portal is an ongoing thing and will continue to be an ongoing thing. So between last week and this week, Temple added 3 more players in the transfer portal, 2 defensive linemen from North Carolina, Lancine Toure and Zach Gill. And then something that we were kind of anticipating, weren't really sure which direction it was going to go in, but we had heard whispers that Temple was in pretty good shape with Iverson Clement, the former 4-star athlete out of Rancocas Valley High School in South Jersey. He did end up committing to Temple. So now, yes, you lose Ray Davis, who had been suspended from the program, that he decided to leave and enter the portal. He's headed to Vanderbilt now. So you lose Ray Davis, but now you have Iverson Clement and Rayvon Bonner from Illinois in the mix. Rayvon Bonner has a little bit more of a proven body of work playing in the Big Ten, but a lot of ability out of Iverson Clement. And again, you look at what you need to address with the losses on the defensive line with Chris Banks, with Ifan Maje, and of course with losing Arnold Ebiketie to Penn State. So more, and again, I think fans are still wrapping their head around this. The guys that Temple are getting for the most part are guys from the Power 5 conferences that aren't exactly proven yet in terms of stats, and you're losing proven statistical guys. But Sam Newman, what do you make of these additions so far? I mean, are these steps in the right direction?
I certainly think they're steps in the right direction. I think that they did what they needed to do. And, obviously these are players who are, talented enough to play at the Power 5 level, but aren't getting necessarily the level of playing time they would have liked, or maybe something went wrong, coach left, that sort of thing. And somebody like Lancine Toure, you would think he was bound for Rutgers with that last name for sure. His brother, one of his brothers plays there. The other one's on the Indianapolis Colts, went there through Shiano, that sort of stuff. So, I mean, to get a guy like Toure, who, as Kyle mentioned, is shot up 40 pounds. He's at 280. They're going to put 2 North Carolina guys in the middle, and hopefully have somebody like Iverson Clement in the backfield. And I think you, as a Temple fan, the hope was that if they're going to lose these players, that hopefully, okay, are we going to be able to bring in that level of talent back? And I think on paper, they have for the most part. I don't think that you can look at 2 guys who are 2 former 4-stars and get, again, stars rankings. Do they really matter in the grand scheme of things? No, but they are important here. And then a guy like Toure is a 3-star too. So I think, when you look down on it, and it's going to take some time to be able to determine, okay, did they get in what they got out of the transfer portal? Obviously there's still time for that to be, still maybe more signings to come before that February signing date. But I feel like, Rod Carey and his staff have done what they could. John, you mentioned the defensive line, losing guys like Chris Banks, Ifan Maje, Arnold Ebiketie. I think they've done a good and Dan Archibong to the NFL. I think they've done a good job of trying to mitigate those losses, bringing in an established starter like Will Rogers, and then 2 guys with loads of potential with Gill and Toure. So, I think they're doing their best to plug holes, and it's one of those things where, like, you can compare it to maybe a sports off season where you lose a lot of players, like the professional sports off season where you lose a lot of players, and you go out there and get a lot of talent, but you don't know what it looks like until everybody's out in the field. So I think if they're able to get that spring ball and they're able to get these guys meshed in, I think you're going to see, that this roster has talent. I mean, we are not going to go out there and predict what they're going to do, but I think for certain that this is when all these just to reiterate, when all these players left, to get this kind of, and especially guys who have a couple of years of eligibility remaining, I mean, I don't think you could really ask for anything more than what they're getting.
Yeah, and again, there's still a few spots that can be filled, and we'll see how things go. But yeah, I mean, we're looking at the 2. All the positions are important, but like they got hit hardest on the defensive line. So again, we'll have to see how being able to plug these guys in works for them. Hopefully we'll be able to, I don't know, it'd be useless to predict. Hopefully we can be there and see some spring ball with our own eyes in late March, early April, whenever it is. I think Rod Carey at one point said he was going to try to push it out as far as he could, and maybe this world will be in a better place with the pandemic in April. But it'll be interesting to see how the defensive line is affected, and I'll be interested to see too with Rayvon Bonner coming in and Iverson Clement. We're also assuming, I guess, that Clement will be in time to be enrolled and be there for spring ball. I believe he is. We have to confirm that. But what this means for guys like Ed Sadie, Kyle Dobbins, we'll see how that, affects the backfield as well. But again, it's never a dull
I
moment.
mean, there could very well be more departures after
Yeah,
spring ball.
sure.
You just don't
Sure.
know at this point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
I think another point just to add on top of what we were talking about is some of these departures allow for some guys who might have been overlooked to, step up, and this is your chance. I remember when Rod Carey said, okay, Chris Banks, now is this your time? But obviously Banks, is thinking elsewhere. Guys that we've heard talked about, Leighton Jordan, Trayvon King, Evan Boozer came on late that season. Emmanuel Walker now probably has a chance to start where Ebiketie was. And then you have somebody maybe like Demarick Morris in the middle. We haven't really heard one way or another whether Kevin Robertson is coming back, but I guess at this point you would assume that he's going to stay. So I mean, I think it's an opportunity. It's granted an opportunity, and it's just kind of that next man up mentality here.
I mean, Benny Walker's coming back for his, I think he is coming back for his eligibility-free season.
Yeah, he texted me and confirmed that he was coming back.
Okay, good. So we know he's coming back. But to me, again, before we get into the football mailbag here, I kind of feel is Leighton Jordan that next guy that you think could be that edge rusher that you're constantly looking to replace ever since you lost Quincy Roche to Miami?
I mean, I feel like just the way that he's been talked up, you would just assume that it's one of those guys who's going to, because like when Quincy left, it was okay, it's Arnold's time. And now Arnold leaves and they're like, it's Leighton's time. So it's
also mentioned, he did, I think even Quincy even talked to me about, saying Leto's got some potential. He's got some potential. He mentioned Arnold, mentioned him, but he would seem to be the guy to me, not the only guy, certainly.
And then Trayvon King too in the mix, and he opted out of the season. And then some names get forgotten. Jacoby Sharp too, I believe he opted out of the season. Well, so they have, I think they have the bodies. Well, definitely, that's for sure. The talent remains to be seen, but I don't think this is, I think we wanted to cast 5 alarm fires on this, and it's like, okay, let's see if the staff is able to develop the talent that they brought in.
So let's head over to both mailbags. We've got some football questions, got some basketball questions. We want to hit football first, guys. Any preferences?
Let's do it. Let's stick with football.
Stick with football. So the first football mailbag question here. Again, these are all coming from our message board, from our owlscoop.com subscribers. First question here comes from Temple J. The question is, can you provide an update on the pros and cons of the starting lineups on offense and defense after all the movement from the transfer portal? Let's go pros and cons on offense first. Sam Newman, what do you have for us?
Well, I think the pros is that you're returning most of your offensive line besides Vincent Picozzi. And Wagugu, he left, but the thing is he was out. He played 2 games for you, and that was when the entire roster was decimated. So I think that's a pro. And besides the fact Picozzi was a long-term starter for them, he was off the field a lot. So I think you return CJ Perez, Adam Klein, Isaac Moore, Michael Neese. They got a lot of names there. That's a pro. I think the backfield, that the fact that you have a lot of faces there that seem very more than capable, that's another pro. Quarterback, I think, would be your con, just because there's a lot of unknowns. Life after Anthony Russo did not seem so great, especially, I mean, we can't really cast what we saw with Trad Betty just because, he took a knee to the head and after one half of football and never played again this past season. Real Mitchell, I mean, he was playing with a decimated roster, kind of looked overmatched a little bit, but again, taking into consideration everything that happened and
also
not having
hurt.
Yeah, and he got hurt as well. So I think the quarterback might be your quote unquote con, just because there's so much unknown with that position. And Deuce Mathis could be the guy, but again, they're going to need that spring ball to get him in there and get him acclimated to the offense. And who knows if he's going to, stick out as quarterback one. And, just going through in every position group, I think, tight end is definitely a pro. I think when they're healthy, they're a solid position group. I think Darius Pittman came on and showed you a lot. So did David Martin Robinson when they stayed healthy. Jarman is a good third option. Even, James Della Pesca played a little bit. They're going to bring in Coleman Jeffcoat as the H-back kind of role, the modern tight end, what I guess Kenny Yeboah was kind of utilized in. Picozzi is there as a walk-on. So, just going back, I think wide receiver right now is kind of at that 50-50. Okay, if Jaden Blue and Randall Jones come back, I think you can look at that as one of the team's pros. If they don't, it could be a con. I think there's a lot of potential there, especially with a lot of the guys they're bringing in, but there's still a lot of inexperience.
Yeah. I mean, for me too, I think, the biggest story of the season would be if the quarterback situation turns from a con to a pro, where again, we can only deal in some ways in the here and now. Temple fans would, with some just cause, complain about Anthony Russo's decision making. Well, then Temple fans saw what life was like, as you said, Sam, after Anthony Russo or without Anthony Russo, and it wasn't great. Again, small sample size for Trav Betty, small sample size for Real Mitchell before he got hurt, even a small sample size for Matt Duncan before he was suspended, now reinstated to the team. But I don't know if Dwan Mathis comes in and gets a spring under his belt and can energize the guys around him, and then he can flash anywhere near the potential that made him a high profile recruit, that's a hell of a story. And I would agree with you on some of the pros. I think even maybe along those lines too, I think you do have a couple of, young offensive linemen that they're confident about, guys that did redshirt like Bryce Tolman, Sam Davis, guys that they didn't have to play right away. Looking at some of those position battles, are those guys maybe going to come in depending on where they play? Do they beat out an Isaac Moore? Do they beat out somebody else? Does one of these guys really push a guy like Michael Neese? I would think that after all they've been through, that Rod would probably want his experienced guys out there like CJ and Michael Neese. But I think you have, and a guy like Wisdom Quarshi too, I think you have in this situation with a lot of these positions groups, it is going to be if you're an eternal optimist, you'd say, okay, well, now I'm looking at all the young guys. So I do think there is some young energy there. And again, if Randall Jones does decide to stay, and I am now completely reading the social media tea leaves, they ran something on social media featuring Randall Jones or an image of Randall Jones. I don't know if that means that Randall Jones is coming back, but if he does, and if Jaden Blue does decide to come back again, I think I mentioned this last week. The weird thing is that these guys are under no obligation to make any sort of announcement about whether they're coming back or not. I mean, they're kind of on the roster until proven otherwise, but if they decide to come back, that shows you that they have either talked to Deuce Mathis or someone has talked to them about Deuce Mathis, and they might be really juiced up and excited to play for him and to play with him. I mean, the other con might be too, and again, I think they dealt with their share of on again, off again drama with Ray Davis, but until they find their bell cow back, that also remains to be seen. But I think you also smartly pointed out, Sam, that the tight end could be a position of strength for him. I'm mildly surprised. Again, didn't talk to him, don't know his situation. I'm almost kind of mildly surprised at times. And again, they're not a tight end heavy offense. I'm mildly surprised that a guy like David Martin Robinson didn't get plucked by somebody, because he's not this big plodding tight end. He's a guy who is athletic and can get down the field. So I think you do have some pros to look at there. What about the defensive side of the ball? I think one of the con obviously is the defensive line is decimated at this point in terms of, just what you lost. I know Ifeanyi Maje did regress. Again, I keep saying again and again, I'm sure other people would. Losing Arnold Ebiketie is huge. Just a terrific kid, really smart, really hard worker, a guy who was starting to look like a future pro. And you can see what Penn State thought of him because they take him. So, I mean, starting from that point, looking at the defensive line, any pros there from the portal? I mean, we've talked about the two kids from North Carolina. You gain a guy, with experience from UConn at cornerback. Any pros there to be seen or to be looked at?
I mean, on the defensive side of the ball, I think Will Rogers is definitely a pro just because of the experience that he brings. I mean, Manny Walker looked like, at times that he could add stuff. Evan Boozer came on as of late. And then going to the linebacker position, I mean, all signs kind of point to Will Kwenku returning. I think him having another, I don't know why he wouldn't at this point. You would think that he would return. I don't know, but we're under the assumption that he does. And then you have 3-4 young linebackers that they're really excited about, plus George Reed, who played pretty well in a secondary role. So I think the linebacker is like, you'd be cautiously optimistic. I don't know whether you look at it as a pro or con just because of the youth there and maybe inexperience, but there's a whole lot of talent between McKie, Evandy Rigby, Kobe Wilson, maybe Thomas Joe Kamara. Maybe I'm missing somebody, but and I think the secondary is the same way, just because you don't know. Is Christian Brazwell going to come back? That seems to be on the fence right now, just from what we've been hearing. But all signs right now point to him staying. Keyshawn Paul, they're excited about. They have, a bit of younger corners after that. And it's not like, that their depth at corner was all that great last year. Freddie Johnson and Elijah Clark were, and Chauncey Moore, they kind of got thrown in the mix there, and Moore's they converted him over the safety, but he had to play corner for them, and those were some of the areas of Temple's defense that got exposed. But I think maybe one of the pros of their secondary though is the safety position for sure. Would they have that field safety position and Alex Odom and potentially Trey Blair, and then that more of that box safety, strong safety role with MJ Griffin and Amir Tyler. I think that, it's kind of a mixed bag on both sides of the field right now.
Sam Cohn, do you have anything you'd like to add here?
I was going to say, if we're thinking the defensive side of the ball, bringing back Amir Tyler, and if you do bring back Christian Brazwell, then having a young defense, like having that experience, having elder statesmen in the secondary, and having that experience will I would say is definitely a pro. But yes, you are. Yeah, as Johnny mentioned, that front seven is essentially decimated. It's more so that defensive line, but losing Arnold Ebiketie stinks for them too.
Did you guys say in a previous podcast that you never watched the Barry Gibb talk show on Saturday Night Live?
I have no idea who that is.
I don't even know if we brought that up.
Because there was a time where I think we had talked a lot of football and kicked it over to Sam Cohn for basketball, and I said, "Do you have anything to add?" And he said, "No, I'm good." And in the Barry Gibb talk show, it's Jimmy Fallon playing Barry Gibb from the Bee Gees and Justin Timberlake playing Robin Gibb from the Bee Gees, the late Robin Gibb. And he played up this character where Robin Gibb was the more meek and mild BG. And he would say, "Robin, do you have anything to add?" And he would say, No, I don't. Not that Sam speaks in a British or Australian accent, but
I wish.
It just always makes me think of that. Kyle would be giving me the move it along sign if he I don't know. I'm still juiced up by watching the Bee Gees documentary. So anyway, let's head to the next football mailbag question here, which is from Park Owl. Question there. The article from Sam Newman on the transfer said Toure entered the portal Tuesday morning and committed Tuesday night. Any insight into that process?
I mean, obviously we won't know that until we talk to Lancine Toure, and hopefully we can talk to him. But I think it was just one of those things where, it's like there are definitely back channels that teams are talking through. It's obvious to when, a Temple player like David Wagugu entered the portal and then was on Rutgers later that day. Okay, maybe there's some contact between familiar faces, familiar parties. I feel like all teams are doing it right now, so that might have been the case. This is just us speculating at this point, but it just seems like, that's probably the process at this point. They know somebody's looking to enter the transfer portal. Hey, we got a spot for you. That sort of thing. I don't necessarily know if the NCAA would frown upon it, if it's illegal at this point, but it just seems like something that, all teams are doing.
Yeah. I would have to think that these guys have to now, when they look at their recruiting depth charts and they're looking at a whiteboard in their office, I think it now takes on a whole new meaning where you're looking at by class, by year, how many years do we have left with this guy, that guy, and whatever. Now you have to redo them to see who's coming back for the eligibility free season. And now I think that you almost have to have these depth charts of guys that are playing elsewhere. They can't talk about it publicly until guys enter the portal and then sign with them, but you're probably looking at, hey, who are the guys that we have relationships with that we didn't get, but we could probably get in touch with again in a hurry. I could get someone on the phone, and they've done that with, they had relationships that, these guys have recruiting relationships with guys in the Midwest. They know people in the Midwest when it came time to getting somebody like Deuce Mathis. I don't know how much they talked to a kid like MJ Griffin. At one point, MJ and Deuce were at the same, playing, I think, for the same Pop Warner program. We're at the same high school. MJ went from Belleville to Saline High School near Ann Arbor, or in Ann Arbor, I forget where it is, close by. They probably somewhere in some way, shape, or form have depth charts with guys that are elsewhere, because that is really, like it or not, when you talk to some coaches, where the game is going. I think I mentioned this before. Again, I think done are the days where you're signing 20 or 25 guys. You're going to keep recruiting high school guys, but I think the transfer portal is really going to hit high school students more than any other area. And I think unless you are a future Heisman Trophy candidate, I think the days are over of guys just kind of vacillating back and forth, like, oh, I can commit, decommit, hold out for something else. I think when you commit, you really need to hold on to your offer now, because there aren't going to be as many around. I think some of these coaches, again, are going to say, why would I sign 25 kids when I can sign 12 or 15 and then get a few impact transfers, because once those impact transfers come to you in the first time around, it's harder for them to transfer the second time around. So I do think it's more common than not now to see things come together, as Sam said, pretty quickly. Next question here from West Coast Al. Will Temple have any interest in the Njoku brothers? He is referring to the younger brothers of David Njoku, Cleveland Browns tight end, a player that Temple tried to recruit when he was playing up in North Jersey. They didn't get him. He's referring to Evidence Njoku and Charles Njoku from UCLA. West Coast Al, to be honest with you, I have no idea. I don't know that I've heard any discernible chatter about it. That doesn't mean that it's not happening. But I haven't heard anything, to be honest with you, I can't say I've heard anything concrete about it. Going over to the basketball mailbag, just double checking to see if we got any post-game questions here from emotionally charged up fans. I don't believe that we did, but looking at the basketball mailbag question there, another one from Temple J. Can you speculate on any bigs we may be interested in? So Temple J is referring to that third scholarship, which initially looked like it was going to go to Brandon Sanders, the big from Florida. Brandon Sanders did not sign in the early period. Again, in case you don't know, we've explained this before, college coaches cannot comment on players until they've signed a national letter of intent. So it's not like we could, get Aaron McKie, Chris Clark on this podcast and say, hey, what happened with Brandon Sanders? We can only assume that maybe somewhere down the line he ends up at Temple after prepping, but I would imagine that they're going to hold that third scholarship for a transfer. And again, I would employ the same line of thought there. I don't have any names for you, Temple J, but I don't think that they're going to take a chance on a project big from the high school level. I think that, if I'm a fan late in the season, I would keep my eye on bigs in the transfer portal and see who Temple gets involved with, because, you will be bringing in Sage Tolbert. You'll be bringing Jake Forrester back. I know that Aaron and a lot of coaches don't say now we want to play with a traditional big with his back to the basket, but I wonder how another big could help a guy like Jake Foster to a lesser extent, or Ashma Parks, and really anybody else on the floor. But again, don't have any discernible names for you, but my advice would be to keep your eye on the transfer portal down at the end of the season, because again, if you're Aaron McKie, just like anybody else, why would you try to take a chance on a project big when you can get a guy who maybe is in the mold of a Sage Tolbert, a guy who's proven, has film out there, a guy who's a proven athlete, whether he's a shot blocker or whether he can just score off of putbacks or whatever. I think that's what they're going to be going for. I don't know how you guys feel about it, if you'd agree or disagree there.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think the transfer portal is the best place to look for that. And where they're at now, we've talked about this year being a quote unquote rebuilding year, figuring things out. They did have a lot of new pieces. Next year, they could be a really dangerous team in the American if they kind of pan out the way that a lot of people think they're gonna. And they're bringing in two really strong recruits in Hasir Miller and Zach Hicks. Both have a lot of potential. Zach Hicks would likely play more the wing, potentially the front court, but you most likely the wing. Hasir is another point guard you're bringing in behind Jeremiah Williams. So to be able to go out to the transfer portal and bring another big similar to Sage Tolbert, I think would be huge. If that person, as you mentioned, is not a project that has established skill, film, and you can bring them in, they could be an impact right away, especially because you may lose. We don't know for sure. They could come back because it's an eligibility for a year, but there is the potential of losing both JP Mormon, Andre Perry, both, some combination of those two guys. Just something to keep in mind.
I also think adding somebody like Sage Tolbert, of his mold, would allow you to play somebody like Nick Jourdain at more of the 4, which seems more of his natural position than playing the 5, which would, and his look like he's belonged so far. So I think that's definitely a point to keep in mind as well.
Sorry, I need to head back over to the football board. Realize I skipped over a mailbag question here from DBlaze75. Question there. What is your very early read on the QB room heading into the spring? How do you think the competition shakes out heading into the opener?
I guess I'll take this one. I think it's up for grabs at this point. I think, like John said earlier when we were just talking, that if Mathis can come in and, take his opportunity by the horns and kind of rally up the offense and get it under his belt, and sure, he's the starter. But I think you have to look at, okay, there's Stradbady, Real Mitchell, Matt Duncan, Mariano Valente. I mean, those are 4 guys right there that can definitely push for the starting position. I think right now it's as open as a competition as the program has had in quite since Collins was Collins's first year. It probably is going to be like that. And I mean, they raved about how Stradbady and Real Mitchell pushed Anthony Russo. So I think it's just going to be one of those where it's like, okay, if they can get Deuce Mathis on the field by hopefully they get, in spring ball, and hopefully they can get him into the program and into their strength training program and everything like that, and into their offense. And, I'm sure they would probably hope that they're bringing in, you get somebody that big of a name in the transfer portal, you would hope he'd be the starter. And I think, they never promised that to him, but his hope would be the starter. I think you go in there maybe saying he probably has like a 55% chance just looking at it right now, but so many dominoes had to fall, especially with the pandemic.
Yeah, and again, we need to confirm it. We've reached out, haven't talked to Dwan Mathis yet. I don't know that he's really talked to anybody really that much on the record since he decided to transfer. On signing day, Rod Carey said, we're excited, and I'm paraphrasing here, of course. He said, we're excited. He's coming in to compete. He knows he's going to have to come in to compete. I mean, you're looking at maybe the single biggest, and I know it's cliche to pick the quarterback position, but I think you're looking at the single biggest storyline there because of Dwan Mathis's history. I think, again, whether it is, I have yet to meet the guy, whether it is a fair or unfair perception, the perception is that he's a super talented guy who has bounced around a little bit, verbally committed and decommitted a couple of times before he ended up at Georgia. He started, again, just to remind our listeners, he started Georgia's season opener. I mean, you're talking about Temple just got a guy that was an SEC starting quarterback on opening day in 2020. And lost the job, got dinged up in that opener. And so some people from the outside looking in might say, and again, this could be completely unfounded. They might say, how much does this kid love competition? Well, now he's going to come in and really have to compete. And Sam, I agree with you. I think it's as wide open as it can be. If you're looking at it on paper, Dwan Mathis should be able to come in and win this job. But I don't know, Matt Duncan, and I'm not trying to pump this up for theater, but Matt Duncan did show him some things that they liked. Mariano Valente is a guy that they had recruited. He wasn't a walk-on at Northern Illinois. He was a guy that they had recruited to Northern Illinois. It'll be interesting to see, what he does. Justin Lynch. I didn't get that mixed up, right? Justin Lynch, not Jordan Lynch. Jordan Lynch was the older brother. Justin Lynch comes in. Again, I think they're super high on him, but he's going to be 17, as we've mentioned before. I think that their hope there would be to redshirt him. But again, another reason 548, in addition to just getting back to normal life. I'd love to be able to see some semblance of spring ball, to be there to cover it. I think it's going to be the single biggest storyline. So for us to say that we have any sort of read on it would be dishonest. And again, we're not entirely sure just yet that he's going to be there for spring ball just yet. I think that would be the goal when I'm talking about Mathis. But yeah, that's as open as it can be of a position. So I don't know how it's going to shake out heading into the opener. My guess would be that, I don't know, if I were to pare it down to 2 guys, maybe it's Duncan and Mathis, just to throw a couple darts at the wall. Again, Real Mitchell, small sample size. We'll have to see what happens there. And I think what you will see, again, just a total guess, but I think after spring ball, however it does shake out, I think you'll see one of these guys leave. Kamal Gray is a walk-on. Now, again, I don't know, maybe if he plays really well in the spring, does he push someone? Again, he was obviously thrown into a tough situation as the 5th string QB playing with a very depleted offense. But yeah, you're looking at the most intriguing position group there. Again, bouncing back over to the basketball board again, as my nimble fingers work back over to the the basketball board. I should have just had two windows open here. We did have one basketball question left. Any update on Caliph Battle and Jaleel White? So 2-part answer here, and I'll kick the second part over to Sam because you saw Caliph Battle working out today after the game. Temple, and this question comes from Temple 2621 is the screen name there. So if you listen back to our podcast with Chris Clark last week, I did ask, I asked him about Jaleel White and about Sage Tolbert, and he said that both guys haven't really been practicing. Jaleel was practicing before he got hurt. With Caleb Battle, again, Aaron was asked about him again this week, talked about how they're still trying to bring him along slowly from the hamstring injury. I asked Aaron, when they had media availability earlier in the week, how much could that open the floor up for even more? Aaron talked about, he's a shooter, could be another guy who creates even more space, takes some heat off of Brendan Barry. Sam, you saw him working out after the game today as you were finishing your story, and you say he looked like he was, again, we're talking about a couple guys just shooting around and working out lightly, but you said he was moving around pretty good, right?
Yeah. So after the game, there were 5 guys that I think the last media member there working on my story, and believe it was Jeremiah Williams, Quincy Adamakoya, Nick Jourdain, Arashma Parks, and that might have been it. Working out, getting shots up after, and Jake Forster, getting shots up after the game. Just came back out on the floor soon after the press conference wrapped up. And we're just getting shots up. Jake Forster working on some post moves. Time goes probably 20 minutes, half an hour goes by, and all of them are gone. And Nick Jourdain was out there for a while working on post moves by himself, and then Caleb Battle comes out in street clothes, sweatpants and a t-shirt, and the two of them start playing one-on-one. This isn't exactly the most intense game of one-on-one ever, but I was able to get some semblance of a glimpse at Caleb Battle moving, which we haven't really seen happen at all. And he seemed like he was moving okay. I mean, Aaron McKie had said it was the kind of thing where it was before the NJIT game in practice that he had hurt his hamstring. He made it seem like maybe they had tried to bring him back or like ease him into practice, but that he had probably done some serious damage to his hamstring. It's the kind of thing where you shut him down because he doesn't want it to happen again. So that's probably the reason he's maybe not fully practicing, and he's definitely not playing. We don't really know for sure how much he's practicing, if at all, but seeing him move around, playing one-on-one with Nick Jourdain, he looked not saying he's ready to go against Tulane this Saturday or against I think Cincinnati's next week. I'm not saying he's ready to go out on the floor and play 30 minutes, but he looked okay. He looked like he was moving around okay. He didn't seem like he had a limp or anything. He wasn't grabbing onto his hamstring. He seemed like he was moving around pretty well. So I wouldn't be surprised if within the next couple of weeks he's back on the floor.
Yeah, and again, talking about a little bit of a different scenario with some of these guys. Again, when I asked Chris last week, do you think we'll see Jaleel this year? Do you think we'll see Sage this year? And at the end of the day, Chris said, I think it'll be up to those guys and whether they feel they're ready. And if they really trust their bodies and they're ready to go, Aaron will kind of read things that way. I think Aaron always tries to toe the line of, yes, I'm a competitor. Yes, I want to win. But he's also very cautious with the futures of his players. And I think he's even more so this year because, and again, I'm speculating a little bit here, every injury is tricky, but a hamstring is really tricky. And if Caleb Battle has a chance to be one of your cornerstone pieces moving forward, because he was a hell of a player in high school, he was a pretty significant recruit, flashed a little bit of what he could do last season at Butler. A hamstring's a really tricky injury. And if you are in situations where you get into a certain rhythm of practicing and playing, and then there's another pause and another shutdown, and now it's like, well, you literally can't practice as hard as you can now unless you literally grabbed the whole team and went to to some sort of clandestine practice at a playground somewhere in the city. You can't do that. And I wonder how that affects the hamstring industry. Yeah, I keep saying industry instead of injury. I don't know why. What an odd mix up there. But I'm really intrigued to see what he can do because he could really help stretch the floor for them even more. I mean, he's a volume shooter and a volume scorer at his best. And I mean, who couldn't use that, but especially Temple. Again, I'm really intrigued to see if he's on the floor at the same time as Brendan Barry and people have to try to close out on him. There's another guy that keeps defenses honest. So we'll have to see what happens there. But again, I think that's one of the most exciting pieces about this team is short-term and long-term. You're seeing some signs of real progress without some key pieces that aren't on the floor. And even if Jaleel and Sage are not on the floor until next season, they are going to be pieces of your future. Caleb Battle obviously being the guy that could be closer to playing again. We don't know how soon, but again, Sam, you saw a little bit of a glimpse of him today.
Yeah, just to your point about like what Caleb, I think, and as Aaron McKie mentioned, as we've all talked about 100 times, is when Caleb Battle gets back on the floor, he will give some kind of, we expect him to give some kind of production offensively. He's not in the same conversation as Sage Tolbert and Jaleel White in terms of injuries and when they're coming back. Caleb Battle has a real chance to play serious minutes and, play in some pretty significant games throughout the rest of conference play if he is able to come back soon. I think the most interesting thing that I'm looking forward to finding out is if he does come back, say within the next 2 weeks. Brendan Barry has proven he's now the sixth man in this rotation. Brendan Barry has proven that he can play 30 plus minutes, can knock down some big shots, and can play a pretty big role in this offense. Jeremiah Williams has definitely proved he can be the starting point guard. Damian Dunn has definitely proved that he can be the team's leading scorer. Kai Strickland hasn't exactly proven that he's there yet. Quincy Adams-McCoy is taking steps forward. But when Caleb Battle enters this rotation, where do you see the minutes go between Barry, Dame Dunn, and Jeremiah Williams? I think those are the three you're looking at, because Aaron McKie said when Caleb Battle enters the rotation, he said it's gonna be cool to see Damian Dunn on one side and Caleb Battle on the other in terms of guys that can score from the perimeter, guys that can play off the ball. So it'll be interesting to see how the rotation works of if Jeremiah is the one on the ball, then Damian Dunn, Brendan Barry, and Caleb Battle, how those guys work into the rotation. Likely maybe they go small ball, and that's the lineup where they use two of those guys with JP at the 5. But just interesting to see how the minutes dispersion goes.
Well, really interesting to see, because when they would talk about Caleb in the past, they would, I think if you'd say, what's one thing he has to work on? And a lot of times, whether it was Chris or maybe Aaron, they'd say he's got to work on his ball handling. I don't expect him to be a guy who handles the ball a lot. So again, he is going to be one of those guys you can say, okay, can you position him at one end or another end of the floor? But yeah, again, a pleasant problem to have, but really it's getting interesting. And again, I'm not saying the Temple can just pick and choose to do whatever it wants. They are not 5-0. They're 2-3, but you can start to see certain things coming together. Yeah. Again, a guy like Quincy Adams-McCoy is starting to get more run, and Aaron's starting to have a little bit of a longer leash with him. Chris, when we had Chris on the podcast last week, he said, you're going to start to see more of Quincy. And sure enough, we've seen more of Quincy, and they've it looks like in certain cases, and again, Sam, you were there today, you can see the body language a little bit more. They've had a quick hook with him a couple times if he's made mistakes defensively, but they've given him a little bit more leeway there. So, and he's, there have been a couple of times where I think he's looked a little overwhelmed on defense and a little less confident. But again, moment today where he puts one off the side of the backboard, right, and then comes back and drains a three. So you can see the shooting motions there. But yeah, I mean, I don't think they're a 2-3 basketball team. Can't emphasize that enough. But it's not like they're an 0-5 team where they're like completely shooting blanks all the time, where they're like, we'll take anybody. Caleb, we need you to come in, and he's going to play 35 minutes right away. It's going to be interesting to see, how they work him into things here.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this earlier in the pod, but just the idea that like how this offense works when Brendan Barry isn't the guy knocking down 5 threes. We saw a second game of SMU, he hit his first 5 threes, and the second half, SMU totally changes their game plan to take him out of the game. Then what do? When you have Brendan Barry, who today went 2 for 4 from deep, you have to look to other guys to score. And today, Dre Perry was that guy that kind of stepped up. To have multiple options to score, that's how this team's going to win basketball games. When you have one guy, when defense is keying on one guy, you have to have other guys, second, third, fourth options that can make plays, make things happen, put the ball in the hole. And Caleb Battle just gives you another one of those options. So that'll only help this team, I assume.
Yeah, just to close things out, guys, a final point, not a mailbag question, but is that the thing that you might be most optimistic about with this team? Because again, I think any team for the most part talks about, oh yeah, we don't have to have just one guy saving us every day and every night. We have multiple guys that we think can win games for us, but Temple really hasn't been able to walk that walk for a while. And again, I mean, they've certainly had some great players. I mean, like it's also on the flip side of it, it's fun to watch and cover someone like, a Khalif Wyatt or a Deontay Christmas or, someone like that, even to a lesser extent, maybe not to a lesser extent necessarily, but Quentin DeCozy, Quentin Rose. But again, what that leaves you liable to is, again, the ball sticking to one side of the floor sometimes. Is this maybe the first time where you've seen clear evidence, again, albeit a small sample size, where you think, yeah, they actually could be telling the truth here when they're talking about having multiple guys that could win a game for us? Could that be the thing that you're maybe most optimistic about when you look at this team?
I would say without a doubt that looking at this roster, like Aaron McKie has said that he's comfortable playing a 9, 10, even maybe 11-man rotation if he feels like he's A, got the talent, and B, his guys have the conditioning for it. If they have that many guys that can make plays and he can keep fresh legs on the floor at all times and keep these games competitive, that is a huge, huge plus for this team. Houston beat them with depth. SMU beat them with depth. Aaron McKie said after the game today that in the second halves of their 3 losses, that his guys just weren't the same. They didn't have that same energy. They've been gassed. They weren't able to produce for an entire game. If you can have another guy, another piece of depth to create and to facilitate and be a guy that can put the ball in the hoop, that is huge for this team. And I think personally, the most optimistic thing, my biggest optimism piece, I don't know. For me, the biggest thing is
sounds like a Dr. Seuss book.
For me, the biggest thing is that they are getting better each game. They look like the chemistry is growing. They have multiple guys in that backcourt that can score the ball. If you look at Jeremiah Williams, Brendan Barry, and Damian Dunn, Ty Strickland looks good until he takes the shot. He's able to make good moves. He just hasn't got his touchback. Maybe that comes from. So whatever. They have those backcourt pieces. They're bringing another one. And they still have Caleb Battle, Jaleel White, and Sage Tolbert, who all haven't played yet. And those are all going to be really, really important pieces at both ends of the floor for this team. I think that for me is the biggest thing. Is they look good. They are getting better. They still have 3 guys that could make huge differences, huge impacts, and could all potentially be starters on this team.
All right. Well, thanks for sticking with us for another episode of The Scoop. Before we close things out, I did want to pay tribute to a former colleague of mine and a former colleague of so many people across the country in the media industry. And further proof that 2021 hasn't looked much better than 2020. We lost Brian Monroe this week. He's a super accomplished journalist that Temple was really lucky to have as a professor. Brian Monroe had worked at CNN and so many other places, passed away this week at the age of 55, way too young from a heart attack. Both Sams here, I know that you guys didn't have a chance to have a class with him, but I've talked to so many students who did. And I wish I had more time to spend with him, was able to be around him a few times, and such a wonderfully warm and accomplished human being. I mean, even if you just Google the guy and if you're not familiar with him, his list of career accomplishments go on and on and on. And he's just been an essential part of the Klein College of Media and Communication at Temple, worked for CNN Politics. He really had one of the last major interviews with Michael Jackson before Michael Jackson passed away, but just a real giant in journalism with NABJ. And again, we were lucky to have him at Temple for as long as we did, and just wanted to pay tribute to him before signing off here. Just a wonderful human being. Again, he had so many other people in his life that knew him better than I did, but just wanted to pay tribute to him before we sign off here. So again, thanks again for listening this week. Thanks for continuing to listen and subscribe to the podcast, and we will talk to you soon.